Hello, I'm Ben Orchard.
And I'm Claire Fitzpatrick.
Welcome to Sword, Sorcery and Synthesizers, the 80s fantasy movie podcast. I'm coming to you from Adelaide.
And I'm in Brisbane.
But through the wonders of modern technology and the magic of Skype, we meet each week to discuss some beloved movie of a bygone era and see what lies behind the nostalgia. Claire, have you ever been in a situation where you're watching a movie and it's a bit peculiar, you're enjoying it and everything, but in the back of your mind you're just thinking, how the hell did they get the funding to make this?
Yeah. It makes me think, obviously, of Gothic by the 1986 film by Ken Russell, or directed by Ken Russell, and it's got like Gabriel Byrne as Lord Byron, Julian Sands as Percy Bysshe Shelley, and Natasha Richardson as
Mary Shelley.
Mary Shelley. The thing is, I loved Frankenstein, but it's like, how did this get filmed? How did this, like, it's so weird. How was this pitched? Like, oh, let's have this massive orgy. Like in Switzerland. So yeah, it just makes me think of that kind of similarity of how is this pitched.
Well, maybe we can do another episode on that, because there's sort of hints of the supernatural in that movie. I think it could count as an 80s fantasy film.
Well, it's 1987, so it could work.
Okay, well, the reason I bring this up is I recently watched an 80s fantasy film called Field of Dreams. It was, quite a heartwarming film. About 50% of the time I was just, going, oh, that's so touching, that's so lovely. The other half I was sort of going, what the fuck? Like, what the hell is happening here? And it's this sort of like, and again, thinking to myself, how did they get the money to film this?
Mm-hmm.
So
that was me with Gothic.
So anyway, I thought maybe we could try and experiment with this podcast episode. Like, let's pretend you are a big shot Hollywood producer in the 1980s. You're so rich that you could fill an empty swimming pool with $100 bills and go frolicking in it, and you'd still have like millions to spare to, make films. And just pretend I'm a struggling filmmaker named Phil, who has only made one movie prior to this. A film that failed to make like even $1 million at the box office against a $7 million budget. And I come into your office and say, look, I've got this awesome idea for a film. I just need $15 million to make it happen.
Is your name Phil Baker? $15 million, like, seriously, that is so much money. And I'm surprised that people have the audacity to go to, the Hollywood big shots and say, hey, so can I have a moment of time? Just listen to me. Just hear me out.
Okay, the guy that I'm talking about, his name is Phil Alden Robinson. His first film, In the Mood, also known as The Woo Woo Kid, was made for $7 million. And according to Wikipedia, grossed only $999,382 at the box office. Quite a big flop. The film that he came to sort of pitch next, his next film, is the one we're going to talk about, Field of Dreams. I guess it's like a ghost story. It's a, spiritual quest story, and it also revolves around baseball.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this film actually turned out to be a sleeper hit. Cost $15 million to make, but it grossed like $84 million at the box office, and these days is considered something of a cult classic.
Yeah, well, I just want to remind people that I have never seen this. I had only heard of over it because of our chats on the phone, but I have deliberately not looked up anything about it, anything about the plot, the characters, just a general kind of basic kind of maybe like 4 sentences of what this is about. So everything is new to me. So I'm very excited to hear what it is, how crazy it is, and guess a unique take on this.
Well, I should also give my background to this.
Mm-hmm.
I sought this film out as a kind of challenge to myself. This film is not one that I saw when I was younger. This isn't like previous episodes where, I don't know, I get all sentimental about my childhood and say, oh, this meant so much to me as a kid growing up. I didn't see this film until a few weeks ago. And I also deliberately sought out a film that I thought, well, it looks like this is advocating a philosophy that I don't believe in. Mm-hmm. It revolves around a sport that I find boring. And it features a soundtrack by a musician whose work I generally don't like.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be a contrast to the other episodes where I'm like, oh, this takes me back to the days of my youth. It's got such fascinating concepts and the soundtrack is so awesome. Well, also I wanted to, I guess, go outside my comfort zone. I guess that's what I'm trying to say with this.
Yeah, I think that's really good though, because a lot of the time I think we find, directors, producers, writers for films that we really like, that we kind of stick with them. With TV shows, we're like, oh, this thing is directed by this. It's a similar kind of theme. We stick with them. We often don't go outside our comfort zone because of sort of comfort watching. So it's really cool that you sort of went, I'm going to watch it. Let's see what happens. And I think that's a really cool experiment.
Okay, well, if I may begin the pitch and just go through the story of this film. Yep. The plot revolves around a 37-year-old farmer named Ray who lives in Iowa with his wife Annie and his 7-year-old daughter Karen, and they own a corn farm that is profitable. It's not they're not rich, but they're getting by. They're doing okay. One day Ray starts seeing visions of baseball diamonds, and visions of a long-dead famous baseball player named Shoeless Joe Jackson. Whenever he's out in the cornfield, he hears this ethereal, otherworldly voice in his head, maybe the voice of God, saying, "Build it, and he will come." And that became actually one of the most sort of quoted lines from the movie, but it's usually misquoted. Usually people say, "Build it, and they will come."
Mm-hmm.
Actually, a few weeks ago, I was watching the news and a reporter was talking about the building of a BMX trail in Western Australia. And he said, "Build it and they will come." And then they showed the bike riders and he grinned at the camera like thought he was being so terribly clever.
So that quote actually makes me think of the proverb that is often misquoted as well. So the blood is thicker than water. But it's actually supposed to be the blood of the covenant is thicker than the water of the womb. So this means like, the bonds that we choose to make are stronger than the ones we are born with. So that is completely separate to
what people usually use that quote to say. That's interesting.
It's not just misquoted, it's the complete opposite meaning. So yeah, I love hearing about learning about quotes and things like that where it's it's a bit misleading. But if people just kind of choose to hear something and believe it.
Anyway, getting back to our man Ray in Iowa, he's hearing the voice of God telling him, "Build it and he will come." And he's seeing visions of baseball diamonds and Shoeless Joe Jackson. What do you know about Shoeless Joe, Claire?
Nothing. But, Nothing. Okay, I'm going to tell you my image.
Okay, tell me your image of him.
Okay, I am thinking of Shoeless Joe Jackson is like a ghost, right? But he is the ghost of someone famous, and he wears no shoes, or he did wear shoes once, and something happened for him not to wear shoes.
You're sort of getting there. Okay, Shoeless Joe Jackson is famous for 3 things. He was a baseball player who played for the Chicago White Sox. He got the nickname Shoeless Joe because of one time his shoes were giving him blisters, and he thought, "Oh, screw it, I'm just going to go out on the field without any shoes." And he played a sort of successful innings with no shoes on. And after that, people just kept calling him Shoeless Joe Jackson, even on days when he was obviously wearing shoes.
Mm-hmm.
And the nickname stuck just like that. The second thing that he's probably best known for is his part in the 1918 Black Sox scandal. Have you heard of that?
Not at all, no.
Okay, basically his team were the odds-on favorite to win the World Series of Baseball.
Mm-hmm.
And members of the team conspired with a bunch of crooked bookies and gangsters to throw the game. That basically they'd place massive bets on the other side to win, and they thought they'd make lots of money this way by throwing the game. Anyway, they were caught and busted, and their careers ended in disgrace. There's a really good movie that was made in the 80s called 8 Men Out that came out the year before Field of Dreams, and it dramatizes this scandal. One of the most powerfully dramatic sports films I've ever seen. You don't have to like baseball to get it. It's a powerful drama about personal integrity and sportsmanship. However, that film is a mixture of scenes that are firmly grounded in historical reality and others that are based off of urban legends surrounding the case. Which brings me to the third thing that Shoeless Joe Jackson is most famous for, and it's an urban legend surrounding this scandal.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that he came out of the courthouse and this child approached him with tears in his eyes and cried out, "Say it ain't so, Joe. Say it ain't so." and it's depicted in the movie 8 Men Out, and it was a newspaper headline, and it became a sort of catchphrase over the years. Mm-hmm. Say it ain't so, Joe. There was a British singer in the 1970s, Murray Head, who had a hit pop song called Say It Ain't So, Joe. Anyway, back to Ray in Iowa. So he's having all these visions about baseball, and he's hearing voices in his head, and he puts 2 and 2 together and decides, right, God wants me to tear down my cornfield and build a baseball diamond so that the ghost of Shoeless Joe Jackson can come and play baseball here in Iowa.
I mean, did he think he was like Noah? Noah's Ark, God come down and said, "I've got to build this ark."
Well, in the context of the film, Ray is quite surprised because he's not a particularly religious person. And in a voiceover at the start of the film, he says that he's led a pretty conventional life up to this point, and he's never done anything crazy in his life. And the way he justifies tearing down one of his cornfields and building a baseball diamond to his wife and daughter is he says I've been so conventional all my life. I had a father who was emotionally distant, and he never did anything spontaneous. And now I'm 37 and I still haven't done anything crazy in my life. I've got to do this just to prove that I'm not like my father and that, I can do something crazy and spontaneous.
So is that grounds for divorce? Which case that is? That's a bit crazy, honey. I'm going to take the kid and just hop off to my mother's for a while when you do that.
Well, the thing is, they're boomers, Ray and his wife. Yeah, they're boomers, but they were teenagers in the 60s, and they were into the counterculture. So the way he sort of pitches the concept to her, she's open to it. And she's a fun-loving person, so a part of her just thinks oh, this could be fun, and it's a good way to teach our daughter about sportsmanship and fair play and such. So yeah, she goes along with it, and sure enough, okay, he tears down the cornfield, he builds a baseball diamond, and yeah, the ghost of Shoeless Joe Jackson appears, and Annie and his daughter Karen, they can see him too and talk to him. So Ray isn't crazy.
Did he think of the financial ramifications of just in case he doesn't come? You just ripped up this cornfield. What are you gonna do? Leave you so just?
Oh, that'll come into the drama later. But the financial considerations. Annie's brother comes to visit every now and then. I think he's a shareholder in their sort of farming venture, and he's constantly trying to convince Ray, like what you're doing is crazy. Have you considered like you're putting yourself in debt? You won't be able to pay off the mortgage on your house. The banks might seize your property or something. And he's like, yeah, sure. But, God told me to do this,
And God will pay my mortgage. He promised. God promised to pay my mortgage.
I know he doesn't put it like that. He just sort of fobs him off with jokes or whatever. There's some really weird scenes in this movie. Anyway, and I haven't even got started yet. But anyway, the ghost of Shoeless Joe Jackson appears and asks if he can like bring his other like dead baseball legend friends to come and play in Ray's field, and he's like, sure, okay. And there's all these scenes that follow where they, play baseball together and have philosophical conversations about, sportsmanship and fair play and the American dream and such. Ray brings his daughters along to see who's like 7 years old. He brings her along to see the games played by all the ghosts that come around to his backyard and, talks to her about, I don't know, as I said, sportsmanship, fair play, history, all kinds of things.
Can you imagine if she went to her little friends and said, hey, I've been hanging out with ghosts, and the school teacher is like, I'm a little bit concerned. A bit concerned. All right.
Well, actually, a bit later, something does happen along those lines. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we'll get to that. What do you think happens next?
I think maybe he starts to build a pitch. He starts to build it all. Like he draws up some plans. So there's a montage. I don't know, of him drawing up plans. He's picturing the future. He can see the baseball pitch in his head. Maybe he tries to get some money, like borrow against the house. I don't know, to get some money to make this. Maybe he tries to round up some buddies. So he actually gets into it, but I do not know how it ends because it's so bizarre. Like, I don't even know if it works. Like,
you're completely wrong. You're not even close to guessing what happens next. Okay. You mentioned the daughter's school. Mm-hmm. And at the local school, there's a bunch of, grumpy, conservative, self-appointed moral guardians who want to ban various books from the school library, mostly books that were published during the 60s counterculture period.
Mm-hmm.
Annie, appears at the sort of Parent-Teachers Association meeting and speaks out against the banning of the books. And Ray's there as well, and he hears a voice in his head saying, ease his pain. When he hears that voice, it's the same time as like all the conservative moral guardians are talking about banning a book by a 1960s radical author named Terrence Mann.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Terrence Mann is a fictional character, but he was sort of loosely inspired by J.D. Salinger, the author of Catcher in the Rye.
Mm-hmm. Which I've read.
Familiar with that?
Right? Yeah, I've read it.
Anyway, like Salinger, Terrence Mann is a recluse. Mm-hmm. And at the time of this film, which is, set in the 1980s, he, hasn't written for decades and is living in seclusion. Like, even his family doesn't know where he is.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Ray and Annie start having visions of this famous writer, Terrence Mann. And they both have a dream at the same time where Ray is attending a baseball game with Terrence Mann. And Ray suddenly has another eureka moment. He thinks, right, the voice in my head is telling me, ease his pain. And I'm having these visions of attending a baseball game with Terrence Mann. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to seek him out. I'm going to find out where he's hiding. I'm going to approach him, and I'm going to ask him to attend a baseball game with me to cheer him up.
Oh my God, they're so weird. It's weird how you're talking about, conservation.
Conservatives.
Conservative, sorry, yeah. The British, I guess, conservative activist and my teacher, Constance Mary Whitehouse, which is more just known as Mary Whitehouse.
I'm familiar with her because she was constantly railing against Doctor Who in the 1980s. and
Yeah.
talking about how immoral it is now, it should be taken off TV.
Yeah, so she was really into campaigning against what we would know as social liberalism, and obviously the mainstream British media. But yeah, so she, I don't know, just a character like her, like she is, even though she's real, for me, she's kind of like a caricature. So this character in Your Field of Dreams is kind of like a caricature based on people like her who actually existed.
I'd say that's a fair comparison. The sort of self-appointed moral guardians in this movie are like the small-town American equivalent of someone like Mary Whitehouse. And the thing is, like I said, this fictional author, Terence Mann, is sort of modeled on J.D. Salinger. And his novel, The Catcher in the Rye, was one of the most frequently challenged books as far as school libraries are concerned.
Yeah.
In real life, a lot of people wanted that book banned from school libraries. Anyway, Ray has got it into his head that, okay, I have to seek out this reclusive writer and invite him to attend a game of baseball with me. And what follows is basically a montage demonstrating just how challenging it was to stalk a celebrity in the days before the internet. Like, he has to go to libraries and go over like their microfilm archives of old newspapers. He has to, search through like housing records, tax records, or whatever, to try and narrow it down to sort of like, where is this guy Terence Mann living now, and how can I get to him?
Funny, because now it's so dramatically changed that we could definitely hunt down these people. We could definitely find exactly where they are.
Yeah, anyway, Ray has to drive interstate, and even when he gets to like the neighborhood where Terence Mann is living, like he has to like drive around, accosting strangers on the street and like asking them, hey, you seen Terence Mann? And if you have, can you tell me where he lives? And eventually, like, he finds out where he lives, and of course he has to like hang around his apartment, to make sure that he's home. And then he knocks on the guy's door, starts out saying, oh man, I'm such a huge fan of yours, can I come in and have a chat? And he's like, get lost, and then he sort of pushes his way in and, says, you're such an important voice of a generation, and, you've got to listen to me because, I have some information that could sort of change your life. And he's like, I don't care. He's like, I've done my bit for the civil rights movement, and, I've become disillusioned at how, the world hasn't changed as much as I thought it would. But Ray's like, but if you just come and see a baseball game with me, I'm sure you'll feel a lot better. and anyway, Terence Mann really gets, irate about this, and it's like, you're a crazy person. What are you doing in my house? Get the fuck out of here. And
why did he let him into the first place? Didn't he break in?
He just sort of pushed his way through the door anyway. But
yeah.
Anyway, Ray then puts his finger in his jacket and starts waving it around, pretending he's got a gun, and basically says, look, you've got to come to a baseball game with me or I'll kill you. And then, like, Terence Mann isn't fooled for a minute. He's like, that's just your finger. You've got your finger in your jacket pocket and you're waving it around like a gun. But it's obvious I'm not going to get any peace until, I go to this baseball game with you. So I'm going to attend a local game with you. You're paying. And then I want you to just get out of my life. So yeah, Ray takes him to a baseball game, and they have a lot of like freewheeling philosophical discussions about the history of the civil rights movement in the 1960s and how the world has changed in some ways and not changed in others in the 1980s. He gets to know Ray a little bit better. He sees like this guy has a good heart. I mean, he's a little eccentric, but he's not completely crazy. Anyway, while they're at the game, they both start having visions of another real life baseball player called Archibald Moonlight Graham. And
Is real legal name? Sorry, is that real?
No, Moonlight was just his nickname. And they both hear a voice in their head saying, "Go the distance."
Ooh, go the distance.
Can you guess what happens next?
They go the distance. Or they have heart attacks and die. They're terrified. Or they listen. And some reason actually do it.
Okay, the way Ray and Terence interpret these visions, these voices, is that God wants them to seek out Moonlight Graham, find out what happened to him. So they go on an impromptu road trip to Moonlight Graham's hometown. And what they find is that he's died.
Mm-hmm.
He retired from baseball relatively early without... Like, he had a respectable career, but he didn't really hit the big time. And after leaving baseball behind, he became a doctor of medicine. And everyone in the town who knew him, speaks very highly of him. They say he was a great guy and that, he saved many lives. And because he was quite well off from his baseball career, he didn't, charge people very much for his services as a doctor. And, that was really a boon to the community. Anyway, at this point, Ray passes through a time warp and travels back in time a decade or so to the 70s when
like quantum leap.
well what happens is that he just steps outside of his hotel room one night because him and Terence are sharing a hotel room, and Terence is like, "I want some alone time to make a phone call to my son, who I haven't spoken to in years. Can you just give me some space?" So Ray walks outside, and then he discovers that it's the 1970s. Yeah, so it's
characters not really adapt. Yeah, or he don't
not really explain why. I guess it's just another miracle that he steps outside and it's the 1970s, and by chance he bumps into Moonlight Graham, who's now a senior citizen,
Mm-hmm.
and they have a philosophical discussion about dreams and not living with regret and finding your purpose in life and things like that. And Graham says, "Look, my dream of being a superstar baseball player never came true, but I did such good work as a doctor, and ultimately I feel happy about the way my life turned out." And then Ray returns to the hotel, and fortunately, by the time he gets back to his hotel room, it's like the 1980s again, and that time warp is over.
I think the main question we want to be asking is, was he wearing flared pants? Like 70s bell bottoms?
Oh, what the Moonlight Graham in the 70s sequence is sort of just, he's dressed very conservatively because he's a senior citizen, so he wouldn't be dressed in the most happening clothes at the time.
Missed opportunity.
But anyway, what do you think happens next?
Does he get sucked into a time travel thing? Or does he, I don't know, meet other people who get sucked into time travel? Or does the whole story revolve around time travel? Or does it change? Or I don't know, because it's so bizarre. I have no idea.
Okay, what happens next is that he goes back to the hotel room, and Ray gets a call from his wife saying, we're in financial troubles now because you cut off a big chunk of our income when you tore up that cornfield that was generating income for us, and then you went on all these impromptu road trips. Those are expensive too. And, I've been left to manage the farm on my own, and it's been hard to keep up with things. And it looks like the bank might repossess our property. Can you come home now? And he's like, "Oh, all right, I'll come home and we'll sort this out."
Mm-hmm.
So Terence and Ray drive back to Iowa together. Mm-hmm. And on the way, they pick up a hitchhiker who says that he has aspirations to play baseball and talks in an oddly old-fashioned kind of way.
Or is the hitchhiker God, and this is some other kind of spiritual quest?
Well, here's the thing. They end up going back to his farm in Iowa, and the young aspiring baseball player gets to play with all of the, legends of baseball, the ghosts that, regularly congregate in, Ray's backyard. What happens then is that Annie's brother comes by. He, comically, because he's like not into baseball, he can't see the ghosts. So, so he sees like Ray and his daughter sitting, by the baseball diamond with popcorn, like staring into, from his point of view, they're just staring into space at nothing, commenting on nothing. And he's like, you're such a bad father. You've infected, your daughter with your madness. And he's saying, look, I'm going to buy out the farm because you're driving, yourself and your family into ruin this way because of your mad obsession with baseball. And to be fair, like he's portrayed as, quite sympathetically, as like from his point of view, this is all totally reasonable. But what happens is that he tries to literally shake some sense into Ray's daughter. He like grabs her and shakes her, and she ends up, and because she's like eating a hot dog at the time, and she falls off a chair and starts choking. And fortunately, at this point, Moonlight Graham steps through the time warp to.
Oh my god! Of course he does.
To save his daughter, and and here's the thing: it turns out that the hitchhiker they picked up was actually the young Moonlight Graham.
Oh, okay.
Who had traveled through time, and yeah, and that's why in the 1970s the old Moonlight Graham was so receptive to Ray, and so easygoing in talking to him, because I guess from his point of view they'd met before. There's a weird time paradox there.
But okay, so obviously he couldn't go back in time and meet his younger self and be like, "This is what you have to do, like, to save your family." This is so weird. Like, again, we were talking about how to pitch something. How the hell do you pitch this to a producer?
Do you want to hear how it ends?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Well, okay. Moonlight Graham, who's a doctor, he basically gives Ray's daughter Karen a hearty pat on the back and stops her from choking on a hot dog and saves her life.
Yep.
And then he walks off into the mist beyond the cornfields, basically saying, my work is done. And at this point, like, Annie's brother, who's named Mark, he can now see the ghosts. And there's a funny bit where after Moonlight Graham stepped out of nowhere seemingly and fixed up Karen, Mark, who can suddenly see everyone, is like, where did all these baseball players come from?
Why are they here?
And then, anyway, what happens is that Karen comes up with a solution to all their problems, which is basically turning this field of dreams into a tourist attraction. And Terrence Mann gets to deliver this very majestic speech about how, people will come to see. This might be where they got the quotes mixed up, because he says in the speech they will come, referring to like the tourists who'll come and see baseball. So come and see baseball performed here. And
but will they? Like, if some tourists can't see them and some tourists can, like, I don't know. That's so weird.
The moment Ray sort of built this field, I thought, like, okay, he'd be hiring it out to school groups or something. Like local teams would get involved or something. And that's what he'd be using the field for. I wasn't, quite expecting that it'd be like a ghost field. But anyway.
Like ghost tours. Come to this field. It's like a ghost tour. It's a tourist attraction.
It's unclear whether they're thinking like people will be drawn to this to see the ghost play, or whether they'll come to see real people play and they'll put on their own games or whatever. But the film ends with like a a convoy of cars arriving at his farm, like people on pilgrimage to see baseball performed in Ray's backyard.
The people have come.
Yes, they will come. They come.
Mm-hmm.
And here endeth the movie.
So, I know you've just said, obviously, like, sort of what the movie, means and things, themes and stuff like that. But what did you take away from this movie?
I don't think that this is a message movie.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that this is really a film that's, advocating a specific religious point of view.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of it plays out as a kind of surreal, oddball comedy. Because that's the thing. I mentioned I wanted to challenge myself with this film. Just like Nick Cave, I do not believe in an interventionist God. I'm an agnostic. I'm an agnostic who leans towards atheism. And I generally find films that have an interventionist God involved in the plot to be very corny. No pun intended for this.
No.
Film about a cornfields and such.
Oh my God. I don't know, it's so weird. Like, have you read anything about people who really like film? Any kind of reviews or anything talking about why they love it? Perhaps they might be, American because they're into baseball and stuff like that. Because I just don't understand. Like, okay, I understand some of the themes in this are really cool. But we've spoken about films that have really cool aspects, but as a whole, it just doesn't work. At least from my point of view. So do you think it works?
Okay, I do think it works. I was very deeply moved by the dramatic aspects of the film. I felt that there was a lot of pathos in there. I thought it was a very funny movie. And I think it's the humor of the film that makes it a success. Like, I've talked about all these weird things that have happened and how, like, there's actually a scene in the movie where Ray's wife, Annie, says to him, the voices you hear, they can be irritatingly non-specific at times. And he says something like, yeah, I hate it when that happens. And there's all these sort of humorous moments like that. And I think the fact that Ray is this ordinary guy, that nothing has ever happened to him, nothing, spectacular in his life, when suddenly, he becomes like God's prophet of baseball, it shakes him up a lot. And it's, but he's also like a very good-hearted guy. He's, very polite, and, he tries to adjust to it as best he can and still look out for his family. And it's that sort of balancing act that the character does. Which there's a lot of comedy in there. There's also a lot of heart as well. And I think that's what makes Field of Dreams such an interesting movie. Is that I think most of the characters react to these fantastical events that are never explained, like why they're happening, but they react to it like any normal person would. And that's what sort of makes the film relatable and makes so many of the scenes in the film just, really funny.
It makes me think, like, I know I mentioned so many times, but like H.P. Lovecraft. So in H.P. Lovecraft, a lot of the stories, all these weird things happen, gods come, tell them to do things, and they go crazy. Like, because they can't handle this kind of supreme deity, and you tell them to do things speaking to them, and they become mad and everything like this. But it seems in Field of Dreams, they can handle it. Like, they can handle whatever is speaking to them. And they're just like, all right, I guess I'll do that. All right, and, that's fine. There's this weird voice or something telling him to do this, to build this, baseball pitch, and they will come. It's just completely different to a lot of things that I've read of. It doesn't seem, like, malicious in a way. It doesn't seem like it's a bad thing. It's just like, cool. Everyday kind of person. It's great.
I guess the main reason why I find stories about interventionist gods hard to stomach sometimes, and I did have this thought in the back of my mind during Field of Dreams, is that, like, all of this violent, religiously motivated conflict was raging in the Middle East and in Northern Ireland, like during the time period this film is set. and
Yeah.
God didn't intervene to stop it because he was too busy setting up baseball games in Iowa. And
Oh my God, look at that. That's
like,
a t-shirt.
well, no, but I mean it. It's like whenever I see one of these movies with an interventionist role, I always think that God has a weird sense of priorities, and maybe that's maybe some Christians would say that's appropriate. His ways are mysterious and unfathomable, and it's not my place to question his judgment.
Or just a macabre sense of humor, really. It's like, you're all ants. I would do what I wish.
I think a lot of the pathos in this film comes from incidental details of the characters' personal lives, and how this intersects with the larger-than-life mystical plot that unfolds. I'm thinking of the character of Terrence Mann, who is a, strident activist during the, civil rights movement of the 1960s, marched with Martin Luther King, and is left disillusioned when, King is assassinated and the Kennedy brothers are assassinated and Richard Nixon gets elected twice, and, then, Reagan's reigning in the White House, and he's like, all the things I fought for, the world hasn't changed enough, and that he's lost his energy for writing, his passion for writing, because he feels his voice isn't making a difference anymore. And James Earl Jones, who plays this character, brings a great sense of dignity to the part, and also he conveys the world weariness of the character while still having the sharp comic timing, because the character's he has developed a sort of sarcastic sense of humor as a defense mechanism against all the things that are making him depressed.
I don't know anything about that at all. I definitely don't do that in any way.
Yeah, that statement you made was not the least bit ironic or sarcastic.
Not at all.
But I should mention the cast, because they do contribute a great deal to making this movie a success. Kevin Costner plays Ray in this film, and this was made, I guess, during the height of his appeal as a leading man. I know this because the poster for Field of Dreams tells you pretty much nothing about the story. The poster is just Kevin Costner standing in a field, and I guess the production company, the marketing people, thought that would be enough of a draw card to get people to see this film.
Starring Kevin Costner in a film, including Kevin Costner. Come say this.
Well, it worked. I mean, it made $84 million against a $15 million budget. So it was, well, I watched it with my mum, actually. And, she's of the generation. I mean, she's a boomer. She thinks Kevin Costner was quite a spunk back then.
She's like, ooh.
Yeah, pretty much. And, well, here's the thing. He has this sort of relaxed, laconic charm to him. He has this sort of boy next door appeal to him. He's a handsome man, but he's not he doesn't have an idealized physique like a lot of other 80s stars. He's not, muscular or anything. Mm-hmm. So he's sort of handsome but relatable, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. He's no Conan.
Yeah, that's right. And he has great chemistry with Amy Madigan as his wife. I don't know if you've heard of her. She's been in a bunch of cult things like the HBO series Carnivale or Streets of Fire or something like that.
Yeah, a while ago. Yeah.
Yeah, well, they have a good rapport as husband and wife, and she also has a lot of spunk as well, especially in the scenes where she's at the Parent-Teachers Association meeting and she's standing up to all the, people who want to ban books and such. You get the impression that, yeah, she's a boomer, but she's a former 60s radical, and even though she's settled into a very cozy farm life, there's still some of that, firebrand in her deep down. And that's an interesting dynamic that the two of them have. And the daughter, have to mention the daughter. Do you know who Gabby Hoffman is?
No.
Oh, well, she was 7 years old in this. But she's still acting today in her 40s. If you've seen, I don't know, the HBO series Girls or the Amazon Prime series Transparent or the Netflix series Eric with Benedict Cumberbatch. She's been like getting Emmy Award nominations for the likes of those now that she's in her 40s. But yeah, she was a child star in this age 7, and she's just such a natural. And it's like, I think what she captures very strongly is that like, and she's a big part of why this movie is a success, I think, is because, you know, when you're a kid, whatever your parents tell you, whatever the authority figures you love tell you, you will accept. And you will accept it casually.
It makes me think of in The Crow. So it's mother is a word for God, and the lips of heart for like of all children. So it's just like you accept things because you believe them and things like that, and they're your, you know, guidance and things in the world.
But I think that's the thing. Like when Ray is telling her all about what he's doing, and he's talking with her about the history of baseball and you know the values of good sportsmanship and whatever, and when she's interacting with the ghosts as well, like the casual, relaxed attitude when she's interacting with the ghosts, it helps sell this as part of a natural fabric of this film's world. Just the way she interacts, and like she's so natural and unself-conscious in front of the camera. It's very uncanny for a performer so young. I mean, she was only 7 when this film was made.
That is super weird. But then it's a talent. I think it's a rare talent that is, rarely displayed by younger actors, because we have mentioned it often, little stiffs and things like that, and you can tell that they're seeking the lines in their head. But obviously she memorized things. She sounded, you know, natural, anything like that. So rare quality in films with children.
I guess there's 2 other actors who shine in this movie, and I have to mention them briefly. There's Ray Liotta as Shoeless Joe Jackson, and Ray Liotta's probably best known for playing a brash, impetuous gangster in Martin Scorsese's film Goodfellas, and he's played very sort of tough guys on film, but he brings this sort of real tender-hearted melancholy to the part of Shoeless Joe, a man who's conscious of the fact that like he's made mistakes, but he wants a shot at redemption. And he gets a chance at that in interacting with Ray and his daughter. And he has such a natural rapport with both Costner and with Gabby Hoffman as the little girl. It's really quite touching. And finally, there's like Burt Lancaster as the aging Dr. Moonlight. And I think Burt Lancaster was like a legend of old Hollywood. He was best known for the World War II movie From Here to Eternity, and this was his last role on film. He had a couple of like, I guess, TV appearances after this. I remember he was in a TV miniseries of the Phantom of the Opera in the early 90s with Charles Dance. He was the Phantom's dad in that miniseries.
Yeah, I do like the miniseries, but I guess I was more focused on the main characters, everything like that. But that's really cool.
But he brings this sort of, I don't know, relaxed paternal authority to the part of Moonlight Graham, and a warmth too. Like he's the perfect guy you'd want to be like your small town doctor. You know, you could imagine people just casually like confiding in him because he makes them feel so relaxed. And it's the little details of the interactions between these characters and the way that they relate to each other emotionally that I think make the film a success, even if the circumstances that draw all these people together are absolutely preposterous. The interactions between them once they get there are really, really quite touching.
That's really cool, because I think, like, let's say this happened in real life. I don't think that, you know, a lot of the interactions, you know, would be like that. Probably one person's like, "You're crazy, I'm crazy, that's not happening," and they're just kind of dismissing it. But it seemed really cool and natural once they kind of accepted this. And it's like, well, what do we do? That sounds really, really cool.
Yeah, and I mentioned that this film features a score by a musician that I normally don't like. The score was by a guy called James Horner. Have you heard of him?
No.
He did the soundtracks to a few Star Trek movies, like Star Trek 2. He's probably best known for doing the soundtrack to Titanic, the 90s film Titanic.
I've seen that, obviously, but yeah.
And Braveheart, another 90s film. It's probably his most famous scores. The reason I usually don't care for his music is he has a tendency to recycle certain riffs over and over again, and he also tends to, how shall we say, borrow very liberally from Russian classical composers, to the point where if you know a bit about classical music, it can sometimes be distracting. And finally, I find with a lot of his scores, he's trying too hard to pull on the heartstrings, and I feel, I don't know, manipulated. And given how sentimental and like fantastical this movie is, I expected that, it would be full of schmaltzy, strings, washing through the film. But I couldn't be more wrong. I mean, most of it is very subtle, subdued, sort of acoustic guitar melodies. It's very nuanced. It's if I didn't know it was him, I wouldn't have thought this was a James Horner score at all.
Well, like, music is often, another character. I love music in films. I love music in general, and often they're in the background. So the subtlety is there, and it lets you know, not that you should feel emotions now, but it's like it kind of drifts along the emotions you feel. So it doesn't force you to be sad, melancholy at certain times, but it's there, and ebbs and flows, and that's what I really like with the score. So I guess, does it work like that? Does it kind of ebb and flow? Is the music, in the right place, the right time?
I think it is. And I guess that's the thing. I said in the past with some of his other scores, I felt like I was being manipulated. I was felt like it was too obvious. A certain emotion was being pushed on me. This score felt much more organic. And because it was so intimate and laid back, it sort of helped me to accept some of the more fantastical elements, in an odd way, because it's got the kind of score that you would expect for a low-key indie drama. It's not the sort of score you'd expect from, a fantasy film. And perhaps that sort of, I don't know, lulled me into a sense of acceptance when it came to some of the more far-out scenes in this movie.
Which I guess is a sign of a good director when they want to be good. Perhaps they have, hit and misses sometimes. Sorry, not a director, composer. But I also think it says, look, you can do it. You can be good. So why are you not good with things?
Like I said, with Field of Dreams, I just wanted to challenge myself and push myself outside my comfort zone. I'm very aware of music in films, maybe more than most people are. I know a lot of people who just let it wash all over them and they don't really think about it much at all. And like I said, I'm not really into baseball, and I'm not religious. So I thought, well, this will be a challenge.
Yeah.
Hopefully, I'll leave the film with an insight into a different kind of storytelling than what I'd normally gravitate towards. And that's what happened. And I'm so glad I took a chance on this film.
Yeah. Well, obviously, I haven't seen it, but now I'm going to. And listening to you talk about things and kind of my own perceptions of the film, I actually going to watch it and say, okay, was I right and things like that, and how do my thoughts compare to yours? So you've sold it to me. I'm going to definitely watch it, and we'll see.
Okay, so in your role as producer, you would have handed over the money to Phil Alton Robinson and said,
okay, so I don't know if I'd give them that much. No. No, well, actually, because it's such a strange concept, but as you've explained, there are a lot of themes in there that are heartwarming and things like that. So I would have said, all right, go ahead, but I'll pay you afterwards. No.
Can I tell you an urban legend about Field of Dreams that I haven't bothered to look up if this is really true, but I would like it to be true. and it's repeated a lot on places like Wikipedia and TV Tropes and other places of the internet that are so reliable. Anyway, okay, legend. This is based on a novel by William Kinsella called Shoeless Joe. And legend has it that Phil Alden Robinson, the director, called the novelist, called the guy who wrote this on the phone and said to him, "I've got good news and bad news. The good news is we've got the funding for the film. We can make the film. Mm-hmm. The bad news is that they want me to change the title." And William Kinsella said to him, "Oh, that's all right, Phil. The title Shoeless Joe was something the publishers forced it on me. It's not the title I originally wanted for my novel." And Phil asked him, well, what was the title you originally wanted? And he said, Dreamfield. And Phil Alden Robinson said, well, they want me to call the film Field of Dreams. And William Kinsella just said, okay, go with that.
That's so interesting, because it's sort of like he, the author gets what he wanted after all, I guess.
In a weirdly roundabout way.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Just a couple more tiny observations. I feel like with Field of Dreams, I was, looking through a window to a bygone era of film, in the sense that there were two things that seemed to sell this film to audiences. The first thing that seemed to sell it was, here's an original concept, something like nothing you've ever seen before. And it was that novelty, that originality that was used to sort of, I think that's what must have sold the film first to the investors, but also just to audiences. And the other thing that sold it was, it's got Kevin Costner in it. And this was a time, not just when Kevin Costner was a big deal, but just the idea that you would see a film because of a movie star who was like, it was the actor, the star that would draw you in. Whereas these days, what tends to happen is that I look at movie posters for big budget studio films and what's in cinemas these days, and what's the selling points seem to be, it's based on a famous intellectual property that you're familiar with in some way. And in many cases, it's the character that seems to be the selling point rather than the actor playing them. Like you see the posters for the next Thor movie or whatever. Thor is the star, not so much Chris Hemsworth as the draw card for people.
Well, you and I have talked quite extensively about remakes and about the lack of originality in a lot of films that are out now, where there is a plethora of books and games and other kind of versions of storytelling that exist, but for some reason, directors just don't take a chance. But then you have, and I, explained that they don't take a chance because they could lose money, and then also they might not have the viewers that they want because people don't know what it's about. Where in Field of Dreams, it seems like they took that gamble and it paid off, and which is again rare now, because it's not like it was like a remake of something else about baseball, about a ghost being haunted and things like that. But it seemed to me completely original, which is what really draws me in.
I can't think of anything like it. I've heard people compare it to a Frank Capra film called It's a Wonderful Life. Although I don't think that's a one-to-one comparison that works either. I think I just loved it. I think there's nothing else like it, and I'm just glad I took a chance on it and tried something a bit different. And I mean, I can see like it has its faults. I mean, it's quite sentimental towards the end, and it's very convenient the way things work out. Like everything's neatly tied up in a bow at the end, as far as all the plot threads that are left hanging, a bit too conveniently, perhaps. But then, and again, nothing is ever explained. Like the reason why all this is happening is never explained. It's just like God works in mysterious ways, and that's it. You just have to accept that.
But I think that's cool, and that's a really, again, original concept, because a lot of films, they wrap everything up and they say this is exactly why this is happening, and they tell you why, and they don't allow you to actually think about it and contemplate your own reasoning of why these things happen. So that's why I think it is also really interesting.
That's all for this week, folks. Thanks for listening. If you like what we're doing, please consider subscribing and sharing this podcast with your friends. If you have any questions or would like to provide suggestions for future episodes, you can send an email to fantasypodcastfeedback@gmail.com. Until next time, cheers.